So I was involved in planning for a big event last year. Let me actually present my screen this time. That should be showing up. Um, right. If you were on the air at all last year, you probably remember hearing something about volunteers on the air, VOTA. This was a year-long event put on by the ARRL, celebrating volunteers, throughout the organization. And there were a couple of ways of participating in the event and earning points thereby. You could either have QSOs with the ARRL officers, and I know a lot of the officers were very excited to get piled on that way. Or the other thing that the ARRL opened up for us was the opportunity for different sections to run for 1 week at a time, twice throughout the year, run as Whiskey 1, Alpha Whiskey, Stroke, and whatever call number your section is a part of. You could work as a portable station. And hopefully you're all familiar with ARRL, but working as their call sign is a very cool and prestigious thing to do. So it's a big deal. So our section had an opportunity to try and get as many people together to work as many bands and modes as we could. But headquarters didn't give us a way to organize this. We had to come up with that on our own. And they had some ideas for us, but none that really called to us. And so the idea is this: how do we get like 40 or 50 people on the same page as far as, getting them vetted ahead of time to make sure they're ARRL members as required and, in good standing and have good band privileges? How do we get them to sign up for shifts without overlapping? Because you can only have one of these Whiskey 1 Alpha Whiskey operators on each combination of band and mode per time. And how do we get them to talk to each other during the middle of the event? If this sounds a lot like herding cats, then that's kind of what it came down to. If you notice the picture here, I was trying to get the Midjourney AI photo creator to generate something about herding cats, and this was just too hilarious to not share. So as far as pre-planning, we didn't like any of the options that we had seen before. So what I ended up doing on behalf of the section was putting together this Sched tool, a scheduling tool that all the operators could log into, and first they could sign up, and they wouldn't immediately get approved, but by signing up, their information would be sent off to the event coordinators, who could then go and do all the necessary checks and get them approved. After that, operators could go in, and as you can see here, they can sign up for shifts. And they can see who's working on the band above or below them. They can see who's working before and after them. And so this gives a lot of situational awareness to operators ahead of time. And so the flow worked a little bit like this. You pick your band group. So if you're interested in working HF, then we'll show you all the HF bands at once. You pick your mode, and for the event purposes, there was only voice, digital, and CW. So you pick one of those three modes. Then you choose which of these time slots you want to work. And we'd show the time slot both in UTC and in Mountain Time. Then you go choose which specific band you want. So you want 40 meters, you're working digital, and all you have to do is click one button and you're signed up. It's super simple. And I forgot to mention here, by virtue of some of the technologies we were using, by clicking that button, that would show up for everyone viewing that web page at the time. It was real time. You could see what was happening as the schedule changed. So that worked out really well for signing up ahead of time. So each operator could fill out their own account settings before that got sent off to the coordinators. They would be shown what status they were in, but they couldn't change that. And then, as I say, the coordinators have some special superpowers. They review and accept the operators. So we've got this Joe Schmo. This is actually my old call sign, who didn't make the cut, and they are on the declined list. But an admin can either go back and approve them or delete their account entirely. Admins can also add or remove shifts as needed, so they can override anything that that had already been pre-scheduled. If someone was reaching out on chat or something and needed to make a special arrangement, then they could override what they needed to. And one of the cool things about this Sched tool is it's open source. We made it available to anyone, anywhere who wants to use this. It didn't get used again, as far as I know, last year. But as my understanding is, this happens every few years, that there's special events like this. And so other sections are free to pick this up and customize it as they want and use it again. So this is out there in the world for people to use. Now, that covered planning ahead of time, but now what do we do when we're in the middle of the event and we want to talk amongst ourselves and be able to figure out, changing conditions as the day goes on? Well, what we landed on for that was a chat program called Discord. A lot of hams already use Discord. It's a little bit more playful than Telegram. There's many chat apps that are in the similar vein, but Discord really worked really well for our needs. As you can see, we were able to set up several different chat channels for specific things like HF Voice, HFCW, HF Digi, VHF, UHF, and then among the coordinators, we had our own little chat room there. So we were able to, break down the communications a little bit so that it wasn't just a huge everyone chat everything situation. You can see here, Amanda, the section manager right now, said, "Soapbox alert, Sunday I made it to my all-time high of 193 QSOs in 90 minutes on 20 meters. So we got to brag a little bit with each other. We got to coordinate. Jim K0SWE was complaining that he was spent 30 minutes with 0 QSOs on 20 meters. Anyone else want to try 20 meters? I've been calling for 20 minutes and occasionally tell there's a noise, but not nearly enough to pick out. So we were able to coordinate real time in the middle of the event to figure out who was able to shift around and be flexible. So Discord worked really well for us. And at this point, I want to hand it over to Wayne, who's going to talk about the things that we did for after the event for processing logs and reporting back to the ARRL.
Yeah, let's see if my audio works.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. The only thing I'm not sure of is how I'm going to be able to make these move.
Oh, just give me next slide.
Okay, I will do that.
Okay.
And once everybody was done, one of the things that we did have to do was somehow compile everything and get it into a format that was required by ARRL to submit these to the W1AW stroke 0, or actually stroke anybody's logging page that they had set up for this event. They had already decided on using a format called ADIF, which ADIF is the Amateur Data Interchange Format. I'm not really sure why they went that way, because for contests, they require one called Cabrillo, which is totally different. We won't go into that one. But the ATIF was introduced in the 90s. It became the standard for most programs, and it became a system-wide way of transferring. You can actually transfer like your log to this log, to that log, to that log. If you look, there's a big laundry list of everybody who supports the ADIF format for export. And I think it just about covers everything. In fact, one I don't have listed that shows up later on is one for Linux, which is what Chris used. So let's move on to the next slide, Chris. For those who are interested, this is the Linux version, but below the name and info application, pretty much all of that is standard. You can see where it's got the header ends, which basically tells you who wrote it, what version of ADIF they're using. ADIF has been a progressive program. Each version will add things. They've got close to 100 recognized fields now. And once you get past that, the header, you move into the actual field name and length. Each record specifies in order, generally, what field name you want to have and the length of that field name. You have them all set up and they all output. Like at the very end, operator is 5 characters in this case, K0SWE. And then if you have another one like W1AW/0, that'll say operator 6. And it gives all the basic information that proves that a contact was actually logged at your station. End of record, obviously, that's the end of the record. When you get all the way to the bottom of however many QSOs you had, it'll be the end of the file. Next slide, if you would, Chris. Some of the operator rules, one of them we had, Chris mentioned a few, ARRL member, and then we obviously approved our operators when they met the criteria. One of the things we asked for that was a must was using a approved program that would output with an ADIF file. That this made everything go really smoothly. We had no problems with logging. Okay. Next file, Chris. We had people submitting, we did have one gentleman, an older gentleman, who did actually just send us a paper log, and we just went ahead and input it for him. So he, we didn't want to cut anybody out, but then again, we didn't want to make it so we had a lot of work to do. We did have a chosen convention for filing your logs with me. I was the one who took everything in. I think 2 or 3 people actually used it. So that kind of meant that I had to go in there and rename a bunch of files to make sure that I had them all figured out. And in some cases, somebody would say, well, I don't remember if I submitted this or not. So here, let me send it again. So I ended up with about 150 operating files for each one of our 2 periods. We had a period in May. We had another period in September that we operated. I had to come up and consolidate all this so that we could put that out to ARRL. Next slide. What I had to do was take a program that would allow an import and would allow an export. Most of these programs, the loggings that are set up for logging software, as opposed to the ones that are set up for just for contesting, they go ahead and they have both import and output, import and export capabilities. The one I decided on was called DX Keeper. by DX Labs. I've been using this for I think John Maxwell and James Sizek turned me onto this back about 2019 or so. And I've been using it ever since. I converted all my stuff in. It had a fairly easy import. I already had a copy of it. And for all of us hams, last line, the best feature, it's free. So you can go out there, download it. It's got a whole bunch of different modules. It'll do a whole bunch of different things, but it did exactly what we needed for W1AW/0. Next file, if you would, Chris. Here's one of the reasons I went with it, other than free. It allowed me to set up some checking, especially duplicates. We weren't supposed to submit duplicates per the ARRL. So if somebody accidentally logs something or somebody logs something, especially with FT8, you log it, and then the next thing you know, the guy's sending you his signal report again because he didn't get your Roger and your 73. So your logging times might vary, and you might end up logging it more than one time. Well, unfortunately, we needed to get rid of the additional duplicates, which is what we had to do here. Another thing was it allowed for what's called a non-compliant ADIF. And there are a few out there. I'm not going to name any names, but these tend to blow up when you bring them in because they don't necessarily follow all of the conventions in an ADIF file. But this allowed me to bring them in. It would throw them out as an exception, and I could deal with it. Another thing that we had an issue with that we asked for was, please put your operator call sign in your software so it will have that little field that we alluded to earlier that had Chris's call sign in it. Well, some people didn't do it. And this program allowed me a place where I could actually put the operator call sign. So I would usually double check or open up the file in a Notepad, look at it. If it didn't have an operator, I'd go ahead and put an operator in before I hit the import button. And it just worked fine. The other thing that really was nice about this, the files for DXKeeper are Microsoft Access compatible MDB files. And this came really, really important when we wanted to start to do some down and dirty stats on what we were doing. Next file, if you would, Chris. There's the ADIF. Very, very straightforward. You hit that thing. I didn't actually put out some of the stuff that they did do, but it does give you a line by line exception on it. And it'll show you places where it might be trying to bring something in and the data is not good. It'll throw it out to an exception. You can save that exception file, go back out and look at it. Now, this particular process, each one of the files I got varied from, say, 10 contacts on a bad day to like Amanda, 193 on one operating shift. So we would just bring all this stuff in for each one of our VOTA operation periods. Next file, if you would, Chris. Came in really good. We added the operator call signs. Statistics, really easy to bring out and access. Just a couple of simple queries. We had this. I came out with most of these for May so that we could go ahead and analyze it. With Access, I could take Access, export it to Excel. The rest of the committee members could all get a copy of the Excel. We could look at where we went, what we did, and operator by operator. Next slide, Chris. There's an example of the output that came out. We could total it up. The names have been changed to protect the innocent and guilty. But as you can see, we had some people would go out and you'd be on one band. In fact, Op2 there, he went to, I believe he started on 15 meters CW. He came up there on Discord and said, 15 meters is terrible. if nobody minds, I'm going to go to 2 meters. So off he went to 2 meters. These were all stats from the May segment that we did. There's a couple places where like 3, we had one guy who had 1, a technician that decided to do 2 meters and did 2 meter simplex and just didn't work out very well for him. If you want to go to the next slide, Chris. This was our consolidated, where I went through and pulled everything. I consolidated both May and September. We had a total of 34 operators between the two segments, 15,195 contacts. Highest points for operator. I want to say the call was K0KW. I'll give him a plug. 3,468 over multiple periods in the 2 different sessions. Like I said, the lowest one was our poor guy who tried to do 2 meter FM. So that concludes me. Turn that back to Chris.
Thanks very much for that, Wayne. I'd welcome questions. I'd also welcome comments from any of the other coordinators if they're online as to, how well did the event go?
It was great unless you tried to work 160 meters.
As I recall, the bands in both of our operating periods were not great. Still workable, but not what you would have hoped for.
I left Willem out on purpose.
It was an enjoyable time. I really did enjoy being able to handle all of those bands at once with all of the folks that were doing it. It was really a kick. And I did notice that from May to September, things went a lot smoother. We learned a lot.
Yeah, that's very true.